We're not going to destroy this country by allowing things like that to happen. We're not destroying our country. This has more to do with fairness and honesty and really our country itself.
All right, well, that was President Trump berating Democrats for pushing mail-in voting, which he says can lead to voter fraud. Well, Democrats, of course, say that's not true. But take a look at these headlines from across the country that may not like what Democrats may not like too much. But here's the first one. West Virginia mail-in carrier charged with attempted absentee ballot application fraud. All right, well, let's try this one. New voter fraud allegations crop up in South Texas. Well, how about we move across to a swing state? Thousands of absentee ballots in Wisconsin weren't counted because mailing problems and tech glitches. All right, well, let's go down south then. South Florida. Mail-in ballots make voter fraud easy. I know, because I did it. And this one. Nevada's vote-by-mail primary stirs fraud concerns as unclaimed ballots pile up. Something stinks here. Well, in the fulcrum, Hans von Spakovsky writes that why the push for all mail-in election is unwise and unnecessary. He is a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation and runs the election law program at Heritage and was a member of the president's task force and commission to look at all of this. So instead of relying on, say, the Washington Post on CNN, why don't we talk to one of the nation's leading experts on this? Hans. Hey, Hans, welcome to the show.
John, thanks for having me.
All right. Well, I'd rather, talk to an expert like you than rely on the left-leaning media. So let me start with a very simple question. The left and the media says that there's no fraud. True or false?
That is completely false.
I thought so. So let's set that aside for 1 second. And I don't mean to make it personal here. Have you ever had your house robbed?
I've not had my house robbed.
Okay. Next easy question. Do you lock it at night?
I certainly do.
Okay. My guess is that you lock your house at night, even though it hasn't been robbed, because you value your goods, you value what's in it, so you take certain precautions. That's kind of how I view our vote. I view my vote as something important, so I want to make sure that there's integrity around the system, and I want to protect it. Why don't Democrats share that concern?
I don't know. Look, I don't know why, but I think they're being very foolish about this. I mean, anybody who's pushing all mail elections, I think, doesn't realize the inherent security vulnerabilities of absentee ballots or all mail elections, because you're basically taking the election process outside of polling places that are supervised by polling officials and where poll watchers are there representing both political parties, and you're putting it out into people's homes where you can't prevent intimidation and pressuring of voters. You can't prevent electioneering. You can't prevent ballots from being stolen, all of which has happened in proven absentee ballot fraud cases.
Well, Hans, that's a good point. A lot of the media and the left is making a big deal about Trump voting absentee in 2016. What is different about what's being proposed now and the difference between absentee voting?
Well, look, in almost every state, except for a few which have all-mail elections, you can vote by absentee ballot. Normally, if you're sick or disabled or you're not going to be in town. And of course, we need that. But there's a difference between a voter requesting an absentee ballot, signing a form. Election officials have the opportunity to authenticate that before sending out an absentee ballot, and switching to a system like California has just decided to do, in which they are mailing absentee ballots to every single registered voter when they know their registered voter list is in terrible shape. It's filled with people who are dead, who've moved away, and people who are registered more than once. Think about all of those ballots being out there to be scooped up by vote harvesters or potentially voted by people who aren't actually the registered voter.
You know, Hans, you said something that was really important, and people have to understand this. Voting absentee pretty much is available to anyone. If you're sick, If you can't make it to the polls, you're working, you can apply for an absentee ballot. There's an accountability factor. That is very, very different. And this is where they're trying to play sleight of hand with what Kayleigh McEnany did and talking about her voting absentee and what the president did. They've requested a ballot. There is some degree of integrity that is maintained between them requesting it and returning the ballot. Sending a ballot out to everyone is different. And you've got to listen to what Governor Newsom says over and over again. He keeps talking about people's rights being denied. This is insane. The point that you just brought up, though, I want to touch on. You mentioned ballot harvesting. We've covered this before.
Right.
Explain the danger there.
Sure. Vote harvesting, which has been legalized, for example, in California, allows anybody to show up at your front door to pick up your ballot and deliver it. What does that mean? It means candidates, people who work for candidates, party activists, political guns for hire can show up at your door and obtain your ballot, and you're supposed to trust them to deliver it. Anybody who thinks that's not a problem, just take a look at the 2018 election. Remember, the only contested race in the country was the 9th Congressional District in North Carolina. The race there was overturned due to vote harvesting by a political consultant and staff who were basically taking people's ballots, changing and altering them, in some cases, actually completing and filling them out. And that's happened in other cases.
And ironically, that was a Republican scenario. And Republicans are the ones that are warning about the concerns in this. This wasn't a Democratic race, but we've seen it by both parties all over the country. This is something that people need to understand threatens the integrity of our voting system and their ability to have their vote counted.
Look, I agree with that. But sorry, I think I lost you there for a second.
Well, we're almost out of time, Hans, but I want to ask you this quickly to set the record straight. Some on the left are saying that voting in person has more potential for actual voter fraud than voting by mail. Is there any accuracy in that?
No, in fact, that's completely untrue. Some years ago, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement actually issued a report, and they called absentee ballot fraud the tool of choice of people who want to steal elections.
Hey, Hans, we're definitely at time. I want to say this. Do you have a website that anyone can go to where they can, if they don't believe that voter fraud exists because they are, for some silly reason watching another network, where can they go to see all of these examples that you talk about?
They can go to heritage.org, heritage.org. We have an election fraud database there. You can pick any state, and it'll pull up all the proven cases of voter fraud that are there.
I really appreciate it. I'd love to have you back soon as these issues heat up, because it is so important as we head into this election for people to understand what's at stake. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
All right, well, up next, we'll turn to California, where the governor, as Hans mentioned, has issued a controversial executive order to send mail-in ballots to all voters. The RNC and Judicial Watch have something to say about that. We'll find out when we return.